Okay.
So now you can start sharing.
Okay, so I can go back to share.
Mm-hmm.
And there I am. And here
We're
I am. I knew there was a reason I had her. Okay.
She is a wizard.
Oh my gosh, I'm telling you, she has rescued me from you just wouldn't believe how much stuff. So, and there's still so much more I still need to learn about all this stuff. And she's like, oh, I'll do that. I'll do that. So anyway, thank
Isn't
the
that
Lord.
the universal job of all millennial children?
Yes, it's why we had to. Right? Well, there's actually two jobs. One is to help us use our phone, and then the other one is the computer stuff.
I can't
It's
look
all
at mom's
My
phone.
grandchildren I will too.
It gives me anxiety to look at mom's phone because she doesn't clear out any of those notifications.
I don't either.
Drives me wild.
She's got like 40,000 text messages. She never checks them.
Yeah.
It's okay, Julie.
Thank you, Jude. I try. I'm just really bad.
Generational divide.
I'm so bad at texts. I really am. I had my doctor's office call me today. It's like, why aren't you listening to us? We're trying to get a hold. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm bad. Anyway.
I can guarantee Mom will check her text messages if I stay out late enough.
Yes.
So I just need to do that periodically and make sure she's clearing them out.
Well, I mean, seriously, but I do keep up with my emails. So we all have our strong thing. My sister can barely open emails, but she's heck on her phone. So there you go. Okay. All right. So, all right. Back to, what were we doing? Oh, yeah, the Bible. Okay. Here we go. All right. So, yeah, it is a hard passage. And I wanted to, as I went through this today, I was thinking, what's the angle we have to take on this? And I decided, or the Lord showed me that the angle we have to take on is the angle we're supposed to be taking on the whole entire thing. And it's this verse. For I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Remember that verse?
Yes.
Okay. So what was the difference? What was the problem with the Pharisees and the scribes? What was Jesus kind of speaking against through this whole passage that we're studying this year?
It was the letter of the law, but not the heart.
Beautiful. The external.
And it was the thing that, like, I talked about this last week too, of parsing down the law to be only about actions. And
yes,
and even taking the things in the law that are not about things like physical actions and making them about physical actions so that you could do it.
Yeah, something that it's an appearance oriented thing. And
Yes.
as we go through the passage, we're going to see Jesus again and again saying, don't be like the Pharisees who, and he says some of the things that they try to do to kind of look good. And if you remember, God wasn't real fond of that idea with when Saul was coming back, King Saul was coming back from his big victory. And he had been told not to take any of the plunder or any lives or anything. And he came back with everything they could carry. And when Samuel approached him, first Saul denied it, then he blamed it on somebody else. Then finally he admitted, he said, but Samuel, will you come with me? Because I'm going to go make a sacrifice. And, I want everybody to think everything's okay, an idea. And Samuel said, no, that's appearances and God wants your heart. So that's my paraphrase. He said something much more profound. But anyway, that's the idea anyway. So they were worried about the external stuff. And the things that would make them unclean is a great example of this. They were very worried about eating with sinners. If you remember, they're always criticizing Jesus for that because he's eating with these people, former prostitutes and maybe current prostitutes and, tax collectors who were in cahoots with the Romans. And, and they were just appalled that Jesus would share a meal with those people. And then, of course, they had all these washing rites where you had to, when you went to wash, and that's what those big jugs of water were doing at the door at the wedding at Cana. Those were for all the washing rituals. And so one of the things they would do is they would hold out their hands and the servants would pour, pour water, and it would drip down their arm and then come off of their elbows. And because they might have gotten Gentile dust on them when they were on the road. Mm-hmm. And if they had Gentile dust on their hands and they were eating, then that means the Gentile dust would be something inside of them and it would make them unclean. And so they had those kind of rules that was all about the external. But what did Jesus have to say about that? Is our sin from the outside in?
From the inside out.
From the inside out, right. And as Bev, you said, the heart. Jesus wanted to be concerned with the heart. So he said this interesting phrase, another part of the thing. It says, he said, I have come to fulfill the law. And I read something interesting this week, and I wanted to run it by you guys. I read it by Steve, and he's like, that's interesting. So I was like, oh, I better not say it like it's like really true. He cast doubt on him, I'm like scared. But the one guy that I was doing, and his name is Scott McKnight. Have you ever heard of Scott McKnight? He's got a huge blog. I like him for the women's issues for sure. But anyway, he was saying that he felt, and he had heard, but he didn't give a reference to where. I hate when they don't give sources, but he didn't. But he talked about fulfilling the law was really meant back then to the Pharisees interpreting the law. And he would take those two things side by side. But I started looking through as Jesus responded. You've heard it said, and that's what the Pharisees taught. But I say to you, and so because they would have been shaking their finger at him and saying, you're not teaching the law. And Jesus saying, I'm reading the same Bible you are, but I'm interpreting it differently. Make sense? And so that's what I think that Scott was trying to say. But anyway, I just thought it was kind of interesting. And I wanted to put that out there because I'm going to kind of go in that direction a little bit tonight because I think it's a really interesting thought. Okay, so last week he said, you have heard, and the first one was, you shall not commit murder. Where have we heard that one before?
In the 10 Commandments?
Yeah, 10 Commandments. So there it is, the law. And you kind of think, now, what is he going to say about that? Right? Okay, but what did he say about that? Who remembers?
It's more than the act. It's
Right.
what's happening in the heart.
The intent.
The intent. There you go.
Right, good. So it started with what's in their hearts, and then it would come out and eventually lead to that kind of anger that would make you able to kill somebody. So Jesus wanted to say where it started, and really that whole process is kind of sinful. This whole thing is sinful. And Jesus was saying, the law doesn't just cover the one act at the end. It's covering everything that leads up to it, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so now tonight we're going to be looking at, you shall not commit adultery. You shall not commit adultery. Okay, so did anybody look up the word adultery?
I did.
Okay. Give it your best shot.
So interestingly, in the Greek, it is primarily of a man, marital status unknown, having sex with a woman who is married. But a secondary term could also be a man who is married having sex with someone else. But I think the Old Testament passages that you gave were more referring to a man, marital status unknown, having sex, specifically having sexual relations with a woman who is married to someone else.
Okay.
I like the distinction of the neighbor's wife. It's someone you know, right?
Yeah. So, okay. So, all right. Anybody else have anything more to add to our definition here?
From Webster, I thought this was interesting because it said voluntary sexual intercourse.
Mm-hmm.
So rape doesn't cut, huh?
Right.
Okay.
Both people.
Consensual.
Okay. Sensual?
I said consensual.
Oh, consensual. Well, it is sexual too, but
Yes, there you go.
okay. Anybody else?
How about defiling yourself and defiling another by the desires that negate your covenant?
Right.
And interestingly, this is often portrayed in the person of a woman who is willfully trying to entice a man into having sex with her. And I was looking at the Greek. It is also metaphorically used as being enticed by a woman to do other sinful acts. So being tempted by a woman, which seems unfair, but there you go.
Yeah, I think it's more than seeming unfair.
Perhaps a little reflection of their culture.
Yes, for sure it was. And it's interesting that's, I mean, if you read through any of the Jewish law, and believe me, I'm seeped up to my ears in it when I'm writing this book, and it's so much of it's all the woman's fault, you know. And we're going to be looking at a couple of verses later on about it, but it's just kind of funny. It's just like, you know, now we always think of you know, the men being the one that start with the lust or whatever, and people have affairs for their various reasons. You know, you don't want to simplify it too much, but just that, you know, nobody's holding the man unaccountable, except perhaps some Christian circles where you know, I see a lot of, you know, well, she was dressed immodestly, so, you know, of course they went after her, and, you know, and you think, so no. You can still hold back even if someone has a low neckline. So, but anyway, but yeah, it is interesting, Mari, and I would like to see that change. I hope it will. I think it has been, especially with the Me Too and the Church Too movements. A lot of people there, you know, we've got some innocent victims there. Nobody was trying to do anything, and then they were harassed or otherwise. And so hopefully that'll change for the better. It's in my book. You have to buy it.
There we go.
If I ever write it, Lord willing. Okay, so let's see here. So we had, where am I here? We did this, we did that.
Adultery.
Okay, right. So how do you think the Pharisees, knowing what you know about the Pharisees and how they would teach the law, what do you think they would have defined adultery as?
See, this just reminds me of I feel like I've heard it especially from Catholics who are really parsing down, like, what does sex really mean? And it's a very narrow definition. So if you do any funny business with your hands or your face or anything else, it doesn't count because it's not properly sex. You're really going to chop and screw and parse that one down to its most strict definition. And then anything else is not properly adultery. It wasn't really sexual intercourse, so it doesn't count. It's not really punishable.
I think it's more than Catholics to do that, but yes.
I was going to say, that sounds like an old Bill Clinton line to me, but
I was going to say that.
It's definitely not restricted to Catholics. I've just heard it more from Catholic circles.
I did not have sex with that woman.
That's right.
Of course, he was debating the word, the meaning of the word "the." So
It
you know,
Yeah.
we're definitely splitting nails.
Right.
You know, when I was a kid, and I was going to be a camp counselor, and I was reading over the devotions that we were going to be presenting each night in the cabin, and I was still at home waiting to go to camp. And so I read this one question to my mom because it was something about sexual purity. It was middle schoolers. And I said to my mother, what am I going to do? I mean, I was just like graduating from high school. I said, what am I going to tell them? What if they ask how far is too far? I'm like, I don't know the answers to that. I mean, I'm still young. I'm still figuring it out. My mother goes, well, you tell me what you've done, and I'll tell you if it's too far. I said, do I really look that stupid, Mom?
I've held hands.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not going to go there. But anyway. But yeah, I think the Pharisees would have had a very narrow definition because, you know, if you should not murder means that you can't actually take someone's life, then, you know, and Jesus, of course, spread that murder definition way out there. And so now, you know, I think the same thing would have happened because Jesus's teaching would be different, wouldn't it have been?
Yeah.
Well, we know it was because we're reading it, but yeah, for sure.
And
Okay.
there was also, I don't know about the Roman period, but I do know in the medieval period, a common way of negating someone's guilt in terms of adultery was just to say she's a witch.
Oh,
She's a witch and she did it through witchcraft. And you saw us having, you saw what you thought was us having sex, but really she was holding me down and raping me through her unnatural abilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that would have been something as well that would have been accepted, saying she was using unholy arts
Right.
to entice me,
Like
and
the crucible.
there's no
Yeah.
culpability for me because she did it through witchcraft.
Mm-hmm. All right, very
Another-
interesting.
Another thing, the few examples of them stoning a woman for adultery, the woman is the only one in that situation
Right.
being stoned.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Even
is-
though that Leviticus passage, I think it was Leviticus 20, it says specifically the adulterer and the
Oh.
adulteress.
Right.
Oh,
both
yes.
both of them are.
yes, I
Yeah.
was reading that as well.
Right,
Mhm.
but think about in John 8 when the adulterous woman is being brought to Jesus to the temple,
Yeah.
and there's no man in sight.
Mysteriously,
And
yeah.
they caught
Right.
her in the act. So he was there, but
Mhm.
they didn't bother bringing him because it was all her fault. So, yeah. And so sometimes even the interpretation of the law, they could squinch a little bit. So, all right, those are great contributions. All right, so then how would then we define lust? Anybody look it up? I think it's one of the words I gave you.
Get your desires on.
Strong desire.
Covet.
Coveting. Yeah, I was going to say that.
Coveting.
Coveting. Mm-hmm.
Good?
Yes.
Longing.
Helps Word Studies has a great phrase to show focused passion as it aptly builds on what a person truly yearns for.
Wow.
And I found the phrase willful self-satisfaction.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm. It's an active desire, not a passive wanting, but an active desiring for.
Which ends up being kind of, initiative, right?
They had set your heart upon.
One of the definitions I saw said precious, which made me think of the Lord of the Rings.
The rings.
And how
Oh.
Gollum.
obsessed Gollum was.
How do you spell
Called it
Gollum?
my-
G-A-L-L-U-M?
Gollum.
Yeah.
Been a while since I read that book. Okay. All right.
I had always described the inner motivation.
Ooh. What was the first two words you went out on me? Something, inner motivation.
Always describes the inner motivation.
Mm-hmm.
From Mounce's dictionary. Mounce.
He's a man. He wrote all my Greek texts, though, so I believe him.
How do you say his name?
Mounce is how I was pronounced it.
So I was looking up the different words for love in Greek, because there are 8, at least in what I researched, and among all the different forms, one that paralleled that to me was mania, which was as an obsessive love, an unhealthy obsessive.
Mm-hmm.
It made me think of that.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, you think of a stalker who just lives and breathes for, contact with this person. All right, very good, very good. Well, I did a little research myself, and I found that it's actually a compound word, epithymos. And epi is a prefix which means on, in, upon, or unto, and thymos is passion. So to have to set the heart upon, covet, desire, I came up with pretty much the same thing. So then is lust always bad?
No, and it's not
No.
used that way in the Bible either.
No.
Right. So what makes the difference between good lust and bad lust?
Well, I think it's one of those words that
Heart.
has kind of changed over time, because I was noticing like the Bible just used that strong desire word, but now I think when we think of it in the negative aspect of a negative strong desire. And it was interesting because you asked the question, like you had us look up love. And after I thought about both of them, I think to me, it really came down to that lust is about self focus and love is about caring about the well-being of the object of your love. So I think it's kind of like, it definitely is that heart thing that Jesus was pointing to, where it's like, regardless of the actions on the outside, like you can do nice things to somebody because you want them to like you or you want to manipulate them. But ultimately that's not really love, because it's not about their well-being. It's about getting them to do what you want them to do.
Right.
Right.
What about
Very
the
good,
difference?
Joey.
What about the difference between crush and lust? Like, when you have a crush on someone, you like them, you're interested in wanting to know them, whereas lust is a totally different
I think that's
ballgame.
more of a flirtation, almost that type of.
Well, and I think that a big part of whether or not the setting one's heart upon something is positive or negative is whether or not it's appropriate for you to have that thing. Like, the phrase from the Psalms, "As the deer panteth for the water," it's appropriate for a thirsty person or animal to have water. It's good and right for them to have the water that they need. And also, when you are already in a relationship with somebody where, having sex, the sexual feelings are appropriate because, you're married, for example, so you're already in that relationship, then it's appropriate to desire a romantic and sexual relationship with them.
I mean, read Song of Solomon. There's plenty of desire in that book. And
it's
but it's
not
between a husband and a wife, so it's very appropriate.
Yeah. So the inappropriateness of this, and the Greek phrasing is really, where it's looking at a woman in order to lust after her. So looking at somebody with the express purpose of feeding that are engaged inappropriately with that person.
Oops.
I think that's Patty brought up a good point, though, because I have seen and I have listened to and I have heard a lot of people from my generation who grew up in religious circles where really the what was ultimately conveyed and communicated was that physiological, like pheromone based physical attraction, that is something that is your biology, that you control what you do with it, but you don't control its existence. And there were a lot of people who ended up with a deep sense of shame and even serious issues that required therapy, professional help, because the message that was conveyed was all your physical desires, physical attraction that you have as a teenager, as a person, where that's just where you're young, you're healthy, and you have, your body is in that season of life. That message was conveyed to them that those physical desires were lust, and then left them with a deep sense of shame over something that really they didn't have any control over, because it's not like your biology. You can't just suppress that if you're healthy.
Yeah.
As someone who came of age in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was all about purity culture, right? Like purity rings and I kissed dating goodbye and like all that kind of stuff. And every time I went to like a large youth gathering of any kind, that was the number one topic that they pushed and pushed and pushed. And it was all about your virginity and your virtue. And, and it was never about like refocusing what you desired. It was about your behavior. And then there also created this whole culture of, if you've made mistakes in that behavior, if you're a teenager and you've had sex, they tried to come up with this idea of like secondary virginity, like where you could like recommit your life to the Lord. But what happened was all these teens who had had sex or who had gone far physically, particularly new Christians, left the church because they were like, I am a dirty rag now. Like, you know, and it was just so interesting because it was a huge topic in all of our Christian high school chapels and all this kind of stuff, but it was never about what our focus was or what we looked to. It was always our behavior. And if you could keep your behavior in line, everything was okay. Because that's what was cherished and valued in the purity culture, was how you behaved.
And it also throws, I mean, the behavior focus completely throws anybody who has suffered from sexual abuse under the bus, because it doesn't differentiate between those who have experienced, you know, sexual contact involuntarily. You know, the focus on the action doesn't give space to somebody who has been abused and they didn't want it. They weren't asking for it to happen. They didn't enjoy it. That part of their, you know, they weren't lusting in any way. And so I think that also, that the focus, taking the focus from that which is done physically to that which is held in the heart, also separates out people who have been abused in that way, that are not differentiated otherwise.
A reoccurring theme that I keep hearing, like throughout this, I've just been thinking about between the Pharisees, between lust, and between the purity culture, is this. It's like, as Mari was saying, it's just about where your heart is and the intentions of the heart, you know? And with the Pharisees, bringing it back to the adultery, their focus was more on the physical act of it, you know, getting someone caught, like who is sinning now, who do we got, you know, versus like what is going on that led them to this, you know, or whatever would have you. I don't know what would lead you to it all, but that's besides the point. Disregard that section of what I said. But like the heart issue of it, and I think that's what Jesus is referring to here. You know, it's like going back to the heart, going back to intent, not just behavior, because it's more than just behavior.
Mm-hmm. All right, yeah, that's a huge topic, and I'm glad you brought it up. But I mean, it really does echo what the Pharisees were teaching, which is kind of sad, and kind of ironic that evangelical Christians would go after that. But that word epithymos is the same word in the Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint. You shall not desire your husband's wife. So, you know, set your passion on, or, you know, that kind of a thing. So, okay, so a couple of you brought up the love section that I asked you to read, and we're comparing it. So I would like to do a little exercise here. The things that are on this love column, those are the things that Paul writes about what true love is, agape love is. And agape is the love that God gives us. So that's the one we ought to be aiming for. And so I just thought, if we just thought for a minute, knowing what lust is, which I feel like you guys have a really good grip on that one, that we could, we're heck at lust. But anyway, we would just take a look at some of the ways that Paul described agape love and counter with what lust would say about patience. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, so let's start with patience then. What in where does patience fall in the lust idea?
Not at all.
No patience,
Lust
right?
is demanding.
Impetuous.
Oh, wait.
I want it now.
Yeah. I'm going to leave the impetuous, Kathy. I heard you, but it goes better with another one.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So, all right. How about kind? Love is patient. Love is kind.
This is something that maybe doesn't go perfectly, but like, especially given the definitions and like the meaning of love versus lust, especially agape love versus lust, is lust doesn't see the object of lust as a person. It's something that I want. It's a thing that I want. I want to have the sex with you. I don't want you as a person. I don't care about who you are. So that sort of, I feel like that it fits with patience and kindness, and yes, not seeking its own good of, like, it's not caring about you as a person.
Right. And Mari, to be fair, all these things kind of mush together in one form or another, which I kind of I was like, oh, should I put that? Because it kind of already says that here, but I wanted to stick with what Paul said. So you're exactly right. Okay. Anybody else have comments on any of these, on this top group?
It kind of reminds me of one of was it David's son that was like lusting after his sister? And sorry, there's a lot of noise over here. And like was like, oh, I can't even, I'm so sick because of like her. And then, he finally got her. And as soon as he got her, she was like detestable to him. Right? I don't remember his name. And then, and then she had to go live with her brother's house, Do you know what story I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, Tamar. No, wait,
Tamar.
not Tamar.
No.
No, not him.
Wait, I'll get it. Diana.
Dinah.
Yeah. Anyway. Okay. All right. So yes, that's a great example. So once they get the sex, she became detestable to him. That's a great example.
It's about the chase.
Yeah, that's good. You know what? I'm going to forget about trying to match these one-on-one. I'm just going to write these down because that's getting too complicated. All right. Never works out the way I think it's going to. All right. So all about the chase.
Self-centered.
Good.
And instead of self-control, I think often in lust, there's controlling the object of your lust.
Manipulation.
There we go.
Yep.
All right. Oops. Good.
And the provoked, I mean, I'm thinking a person is easily provoked if they don't get what they want, when they want it, how they want it.
I'm having trouble spelling tonight. Okay. Sorry.
Song of Solomon says, do not arouse or awaken love before it's so desired. So lust is the opposite of that. It's instigated on your own terms and at your own time.
Oh, I turned on.
Good.
I mean, I'm thinking of there was an incident some time ago, which was really dreadful, of a young man named Dylan Roof, I believe. No, that was a different one. It was a young man who felt slighted by the women in his life. So he went out with a gun and he just shot women randomly. It was in California. And that makes me think of, does not take into account a wrong suffered, of, lust will turn in an instant if it seems like, that this person has wronged you. Suddenly they're the most disgusting person on the face of the planet.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to think how to write this, and then I missed what you said. Say it again. I'm sorry.
I guess that lust, once insulted, will absolutely flip and will start hating instead of wanting.
Well, and I think that example that you gave is a good illustration of how when lust is the case, he had a rejection of other people's healthy boundaries. Like he basically had the sense of, if I want you or I'm interested in you, then I'm entitled to you, and you have no right to say no. And I think that is something that is true about lust. It's like that sense of, well, it doesn't matter what you want, it matters what I want.
Excellent.
What I'm hearing is that lust can very easily turn into mental illness.
Or is it a form of,
Mm.
in some regard?
Is it a what?
A form of mental illness.
Yeah. Well, I think when it gets to that point of what we've been talking about, the person has lost touch with reality, and
I think it's less of like I'm reminded of an excellent book that's about abuse called "Why Does He Do That" by Lundy Bancroft, and he talks about how abusiveness is not a mental illness; it is a disease, if you will, of the values. So your values become twisted, and you do not value other people anymore. You are more important than them. And so you're allowed to hurt them if they don't do the stuff that you want them to, because you're more important than they are.
well, I'm
So,
not trying to use mental illness as an excuse.
yeah.
Yeah, or even that they're a victim and that's why they did it. Yeah, that whole, which is, I know Al-Anon, they're very big on getting people to get rid of this victim idea because they'll never heal if they think that way. So very good, very good. All right.
I've heard
Oops, sorry.
I've heard Julie say before, any sin is a perversion of something beautiful God has given us. And what we've described right here is how love has been taken by Satan, perverted, and become a sin that plagues mankind when it was supposed to be a gift given to us by God.
Very good.
I also want to point out that the list of love versus lust, I think, is also very pertinent in a marriage relationship, as well as when looking at, whether or not things are appropriate in a marriage versus not in a marriage because they're not married. But I think in a marriage, there are still issues of love versus lust all the time.
And I think that's such a good point, because I think that that's something that the Pharisees would not, that Jesus would have teaches and taught, and that the Pharisees would not have agreed with. It seems like they kind of had the kind of attitude of, well, you're my wife now, so I kind of own you, and you got to do what I want. Like they wouldn't have agreed with that, but I definitely think that's what Jesus was teaching.
Well, it's like the idea of in the U.S. Until shockingly recently, a spouse legally could not rape their spouse because it was assumed under the law that if you're married, your body is available to your spouse 24/7, no matter what. You're not allowed to say no to your spouse for sex. It was literally legally impossible. You could not pursue any kind of legal action for that kind of abuse by your spouse, because it's like, well, you got married, and it's like absolutely perverting like you said, perverting what a marriage is supposed to be, and making it violent and a tool of abuse instead of something that is shared equally.
And I think Paul made that pretty clear in 1 Corinthians 7, where he's talking about, you have the right to talk over your own body. You're never owned by anybody. And he gave the wife as well as the husband permission to withdraw for a bit. It does make me think of, I was long time ago, I was in a marriage class, and the wife made this confession that she and her husband have sex every single night. And all the women in the group almost fainted, as you can imagine. And he said, well, I have to have it. I have to have it every night. It's just my need. And I know another couple that was like that too. And it wasn't healthy. To me,
No.
it was like
Dominance.
Yeah. And it just was not, in both of those cases, the women were in agony. but they felt like they couldn't refuse. But you know, so Melanie's right. Things can get messed up, even in a marriage situation where people don't understand what agape is. Agape is wanting the best for the other person,
Right.
doing everything they can for their good, not our own. And that's what God did. He sent Jesus to die on the cross. He didn't, you know, that was a huge sacrifice on his part, his only beloved son. And Jesus left the throne and all his glory and came down to earth and died in our place because of agape. You know, so that's the kind of love God gives us. And you know what? Undeserved. We couldn't earn that love. He just gives it to us. So if you get this undeserved, absolutely for the other person, no matter what they do kind of a thing, that's a really far cry from lust. And I just thought it was a good exercise to really look at these things and kind of compare the two. Okay. All right. So then there's a downward spiral of sin there. No, I keep getting committed. Wait a minute. Okay. So James says this: when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Now compare that with what it says in Proverbs. To keep you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress, do not desire her beauty in your heart, nor let her capture you with her eyelids. I'm sorry. That cracks me up every time I read it. Watch out for those eyelids. But anyway, okay. For on account of a harlot, one is reduced to a loaf of bread, and an adulteress hunts for the precious life. Can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Or can a man walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? So is the one who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her will not go unpublished. And look at that one as compared to James, who again said, when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin's accomplished, it brings forth death. So I was kind of looking at those two. Did I give you that as a part of the homework, or did I just make that up this week?
The James you did.
Homework.
It was?
Yes.
It was, yeah.
Okay, so what? All right, then you should know something. Tell me what. I know, might be asking a little bit, but anyway, just kidding. So what's the progression you see here? I'll give you a hint. It starts with lust.
Right.
Well, I think I think I also was talking about this a little bit last week. Of you can't be tempted by something that you don't already want. I gave the example of tomatoes. I am not tempted by tomatoes because I do not like them. So you can lay out the most beautiful plate of sliced tomato the world has ever seen, and I will not be tempted because I don't like it. And so, like, it starts with, like you said, it starts with the attraction, the interest. It is fed by deliberately lusting, and
Yes.
then it progresses from there. Because I was talking about this actually in a completely different context, where there's a huge difference between involuntarily experiencing a desire and feeding that desire, because eventually you get to the point where you say, the only thing keeping me from doing this thing that I want is that we've got these pesky laws and consequences in the way, and if they weren't in the way, I would do the thing that I want. And then it's a very short step from there to say, well, I figured out how to get around the laws and the consequences, so I'm going to do the thing that I want to do. And it starts with, instead of saying, no, that's a bad thing to want, and it will only lead to destruction and badness, you say, actually, it's a good thing for me to want, and I bet I could do it in a cool and good way.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of criminals that just, especially on all the cop shows that I watch, they are absolutely, they've convinced themselves they're innocent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of that, Mari, is that, you find ways around it, and then you only think in terms of those terms. So yeah, very good. Very good. All right. So it starts with lust, desiring her beauty. And then you got this word capture here, which kind of draws you in. And that's, I think, is where the lust happens. First is a look, then there's the lust, and then they fall. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what I came up with. Oops. It starts with a look and moves to desire or lust, then to the stumble when you actually fall, and then finally there's consequences. And don't you think that you can get away with adultery without consequences? Lives are ruined, and your family's lives, your the other person's family. I've just seen such hard things happen when adultery is committed within a marriage. Not that it's not redeemable. God can do anything, but it's going to take two people to do that, the offender and the offended. And they have to work together in tandem and seek the Lord out. But and some of them, it's just not, it's too bad of a situation. But just that whole idea that it does. There's terrible things that happen with it. But it all begins with that look. But that's okay. You can look, but when you start obsessing on it, then it turns into desire, and that's when lust starts to have its way, and then finally stumbling in the consequences afterwards. So I didn't know if you noticed the pattern that Jesus used. He does this in another place, probably more than that, but in the lost coin and the lost sheep in Luke 15, and he uses almost identical language, and it's just insert here, this blank, but coin, sheep. And so anyway, I noticed, if your right eye makes you stumble, if your right hand makes you stumble, tear out your right eye, tear out your right hand, throw it from you. It's better to lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. So anybody take a look at what's the significance of a right eye or a right hand?
I did notice, I actually saw somebody who thought that it might be a reference to certain sexual acts one might do with one's right hand, especially because in the Greek, apparently, the right side, the right hand, is actually considered to be feminine because the right hand is the one that receives, and the Greeks were gross.
Huh. Very interesting. I heard about the first part, but not that.
Yeah.
No, very good.
So the right hand is not only the one that reaches out and grasps, so it's the active hand, but it is also the hand that receives, so it is the feminine and passive hand, which is wild and weird. And again, the Greeks were gross. That I think I want to say it was Strong's who said that, but I could be wrong.
Somebody I read said something like that. Yeah. Did anybody look up?
That's Strong. It's Strong who says it.
Okay. Does anybody look up Samuel 11:2?
Samuel.
I think I did, but I don't remember what it said.
Yeah.
Somebody get that one, and then somebody else get Zechariah 11:17.
Okay. The Samuel one was removing the right eye, sort of as a sign of conquered or defeated.
Right. It was a shame to have your right eye removed, right?
But I also saw that right metaphorically could be like the place of honor or authority, taking hold of. It's like the side that's the side that's controlling.
Right. And then the right hand of God, and you sit at the right hand of, the right hand can be positive too.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, and the Zechariah passage is about being crippled, right? It's about being crippled if your right eye is taken out.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's about being disabled, essentially.
Yeah. Woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock. A sword will be on his arm and on his right eye. His arm will be totally withered, and his right eye will be blind. So again, kind of a shame, kind of a thing. Yeah, very good, very good. And yes, I mean, I remember long ago, I heard a sermon about the weak Christian, and the message was about Ehud, who was the left-handed judge, and that he would have been considered weaker. But then I was like intrigued by that. But then I looked up other places where it talked about left-handed, and there was like this whole gang of people a few chapters later that they were like strong warriors, and they were all left-handed. So I was like, I'm not sure the writer of Judges meant that, so I had to kind of look a little further. I never did tell the guy that spoke the message. I thought about it, but that seems a little bit,
Also in the Mideast culture, at least in that time, and even more recently, your left hand was used for unclean things.
Right.
Yeah, I know. Like when the Joni, maybe you can remember, but the Minangkabau, the people in Indonesia, if you extend, is it the right hand? They're insulted if you want to shake their hand with your right hand.
Yes.
That's where you wipe yourself with.
Yes.
So you never ever extend your right hand, which is absolutely the normal thing for the rest of us. But
I mean, even to like the English language, the word sinister is from the Latin and it means left. That's why you still have in like heraldry, a band sinister is a left-leaning band, and that whole meaning of something that's sinister, it comes from the left hand being the shifty one.
interesting. Okay, so but I think in this case, I think what it's really expressing kind of the power and the value, and if something's going to lead you in the wrong direction, then cut it off, right? How about stumble? Did anybody come up with a definition on that?
I found to put an obstacle that will cause tripping was kind of my summary of the different things. But then I thought it was interesting because one of the places I looked it up also talked about a feeling of displeasure over having tripped. And that made me think about how Jesus is focusing on the internal heart issue of your eye, your hand, and that's where you should be focusing your displeasure and your actions over what made you trip. But usually, and this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, where it was like blaming women for being temptresses. And I feel like Jesus is kind of flipping that concept of it's not the woman that's making you stumble. It's what's in here that's making you stumble.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that's also, again, with the internalization of the fault here of nowadays we think of it less because there are, we have ways to make up for certain physical disabilities, but especially at this time, even if you survived, the metaphor goes because, even if you survive such a grievous injury, which is not a given, you'd be mutilated for the rest of your life and you would be badly, badly disabled. Even losing an eye would be a terrible disability, especially if it was your dominant eye, your dominant right eye. Losing your hand would be worse. You would become dependent upon others. So he's saying it is better to self-mutilate and to become disabled in a way that is shameful than it is to not blame yourself and keep on going.
Right. To remove,
refuse responsibility.
Right. Get out of that situation,
Oh, and that just reminded me that would also have prevented the person from being able to go into the temple. At least according to the Old Testament law, in the tabernacle, there was laws about it saying that like a person who was disfigured was not permitted in.
Yes. That's a very interesting thought, Joy.
Yeah.
When I looked up
Sorry, go ahead.
stumble,
Mhm.
when I looked up stumble, I found, normal things, but one reference of falling away and being the opposite of endurance.
Oh.
So it stops you from from enduring, and you take a turn.
Kind of
Yeah.
steadfast.
Right. Very good. Very good.
I thought it was interesting, the hand and the eye. It's like going that sort of the look up with the looks at the woman with lust, and then the hand is, I think of eyes as you're seeing it, and the hand's what is a form of carrying it out.
The action.
The action.
There
Yeah.
is
Oh, very
there is
good.
also the metaphor of, I think I alluded to this earlier, of acting upon one's lust on yourself using your right hand. And apparently, I learned this today, apparently it was a common refrain in rabbinical teachings that the man who uses his hand in that way, I shall be delicate, should have it cut off. So it was referred to that way multiple times. So I think that the connection would have been in the minds of the people who were listening, that it was maybe double speak. Because I mean, Jesus never said one thing when he could say 17 things.
Well, no, you're right. And I think even if we look at the language from the passage we had last week, and then the passage this week, he's speaking in very, I don't want to say exaggerated, that's not the right word, but in very powerful language, using metaphors that are a little bit, shocking.
Startling.
Because he's, startling, because he's trying to make a point here. Right.
Dramatic.
And that's, that's what he did sometimes, is to get people's attention. He would use these strong ideas, but I think he's speaking metaphorically. At least the stumbling is a metaphoric term. He's not talking about literally tripping. So,
yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Isn't the embrace used in Song of Solomon, isn't that with the right hand? And isn't that supposed to represent that whole thing, God's true love for us?
Well, Jesus is sitting at the right hand of God the Father.
Right.
So yeah, it doesn't have to be a negative term at all, but it's something that's, to me, it's like the thing, we're more prone to go to the right hand side than the left if you're right handed.
Kind of like if you were to go out of that realm of what is supposed to be a perfect love, you are desecrating it. Just as Christ loving us, and to give us a metaphorical look at the lovingness of a couple and the purity of that couple, but then you're totally desecrating the whole thing, desecrating the image of who God is, as well as desecrating the image of that marriage bed that is described in Song of Solomon.
Mm-hmm. So kind of using it for the wrong purpose, then you cut it off. But it should stand for something good and true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very good. All right. So one more thing, and I'm sorry I'm rushing us on here, but I do want to get to this little juicy tidbit.
Yes.
On verse 31. I had to speak on divorce when we were going through Mark at New Hope, and I was like, are you kidding me? I was having a heart attack doing it. I told Steve, I've spoken on it. Now I have to teach you for Bible study, and I still don't know what the heck it's talking about. But I mean a little bit, but not much. So it says that the law is whoever sends his wife away is to give her a certificate of divorce. And that, of course, is from Deuteronomy 24, 1-4. And basically what that law does, that means she can leave. It's really for the woman's protection, by the way, if she has her certificate of divorce. And if she leaves and becomes another man's wife, and then her second husband puts her out or dies, the first husband is not allowed to marry her again. And it says, because she has been defiled. And that word is made clean, unclean. And that's an abomination before the Lord. But you don't get the feeling, the way the law is written, it's not really written because the woman is doing something wrong. It's about the men manipulating and, now you're married, now you're not, I'll marry you again. And some people have even written, if her husband dies, then she gets left money. Well, then he'll marry her again for her money from the second husband and that kind of thing. So I think to me, what it really goes down to, and sorry, I'm putting this into a quick little capsule here, but people need to take marriage seriously. And if you remember, and you did look up some of these verses about, the idea of, what God meant marriage to be, the two shall become one flesh. And but that whole relationship, which was perfect for a time in the Garden of Eden, dissolved quickly when sin came along, and the relationships were absolutely changed, the husband and the wife, and between them and God, and so nothing would be the same again. But so anyway, so that's the two things I think of. Is it is serious? God does take it seriously, but at the same time, it's sin has messed things up, and so Jesus says in a couple of different places that law was given by Moses because of men's hard hearts.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And what one thing that was happening, and I think that's in Mark 10:11-12. One thing that was happening at the time was that Pharisees were doing the letter of the law. And the letter of the law was, if you find some, what's the word?
Indecency.
Indecency. But it doesn't ever define indecency. So the Pharisees, with all their rules and regulations, if she burned your toast, she's history. They could find many reasons which really should not be a grounds for divorce. And the thing is, they were doing it. They were divorcing their wives, not because they needed to be out of the relationship. They were divorcing their wives because they wanted to marry somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Julie,
Jesus, I'm sorry?
I heard somewhere, but I have no idea if it's true or not, that at that time, I don't know if it was just the Pharisees, that they would go like to a village to teach and marry, and then, was that true?
Yes, well, I've read it too.
Yeah,
And then they would
itinerant
divorce and go
preachers,
to the next village and marry somebody from there, and then divorce her and go to the next village and marry somebody from there.
Mm.
Is that
Nice gig if you can get it?
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've read that myself.
okay.
And with no women's rights at that point, for them
Yes.
to be able to take care of themselves and any children that came into existence from that lifestyle, you're just putting people into destitution.
Yes. I mean, it's bad enough in modern day. People are destituted by divorce, lose their homes, sometimes their families. I mean, it's a horrible thing they have to go through, because there's just things that happen because of it.
You want to have people that you don't have to pay, and that as an added bonus, you get to have sex with her. Fun. By the way, Julie, one thing that I did read, I was looking at the interlinear Hebrew for the Deuteronomy passage that was talking about the indecency. And what was interesting to me is that the word, it was not uncleanness. It was a word that actually means most strictly the genitals. And it is basically the sense of like the shameful nudity, with a euphemistic usage would be living with someone else without being married. So I think it was sort of a euphemistic way of indicating that person was having extramarital relations or being adulterous, because it was specifically talking about this sort of shameful exposure, like with Noah with his sons, this exposure of one's nudity in a public setting.
Now, unfortunately, the Pharisees didn't know that, or they knew it, they ignored it.
They ignored it on purpose.
That's right. And it became an excuse rather than a protection.
So I was going to say, I actually read a very good book by David Instone Brewer, and he did a lot of research, and he said that at the time they actually had the Pharisees, they had developed, it was basically called for any cause divorce. And so like they could just be on the right side of the law by divorcing for any cause.
But the thing is, I think Jesus is looking not only at the frivolousness of that kind of an attitude, but also for the fact that they were
Leaders.
They were going.
Leaders.
Yes, they were, and they were doing it because they wanted to marry somebody else. So how is that not adultery? It's like legal adultery, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I've jumped through these hoops, nobody's going to be mad at me. I'll tell you what, I've seen it in modern day. Because I've seen people who, they're divorcing their husband or wife, and they hire a PI to follow that person around and see if they can catch them in adultery, because if they can, then that frees the other person to marry. And I know people that have done it, and I just, something's wrong with that.
Right.
It doesn't sound like God at all to me. So anyway, but just so you know that's some of the things that were going on, and I don't have a lot more to say about it, just because I'm still struggling with the passage, and I apologize for that. But we have 2 minutes left. I can do it. So we're going to do the application here. So how does this teaching then fit in with the Sermon on the Mount? Where is Jesus going with it? Now, if you remember, Jesus is going for the heart. And in Matthew, he says, but the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications. The heart is the real source of the lust/adultery problem. It's the heart. It's the heart. And so we think, well, okay, I got to change my heart. I don't want to be that person that ends up in that situation. But the problem is we can't change our own hearts. We don't have the ability to change our hearts, but God does. And this is what it says. Moreover, oops, that typo there. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will remove the heart of stone and from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. So what's God going to do here? He's going to take a stone heart, a dead heart that's not doing anything for the person that has it, and he's going to change it into something that's going to start beating again and functioning normally like it's supposed to be. That's something God does for us. He gives us the new heart. And so it's not about pulling up our bootstraps. It's about turning ourselves over to him and saying, I believe you. I believe that Jesus died for me. I believe that's the only way that I can be right with you. I'm going to trust you for my salvation. And then he gives us a new heart. So now all of a sudden, we're not helpless anymore. We're not helpless to a heart that's only going to lead us to bad things. And I started thinking about that because the verse that's been like making me dread teaching the rest of Matthew 5 is this verse. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Now, I don't know about you, but I pretty much have that, wrapped up. Nobody has it wrapped up. But I was thinking about it. If, as Jesus is teaching, that it's about the heart and God wants us to be perfect, what does that mean? And I looked up the word perfect, pirao, sorry. And it's to make full, to cause to abound, to furnish or supply liberally, to complete. So to be so full that you're just abounding in stuff and there's absolutely no needs left, right? Well, think about who God is. He's perfect. He has no need of anybody. He doesn't need any people in his life. He doesn't need any help in anything that he does. He is perfect, complete, just completely abundant in who he is. And so he's not going to be someone who needs anything. And so that's what he's doing for us. He's doing it for us. He's made us complete in Christ. Because in Colossians, it says, in him, all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form, and in him you have been made complete. So now you go back to the Beatitudes and you go back to all these heart issues that Jesus is talking about, and we've been equipped to handle that stuff. And he did it. And so then I started thinking about this. And this is our righteousness. Our new heart comes from God. And I started thinking about the rewards we get once we're poor in spirit and we understand our spiritual crepitness. And then once we mourn that and then we put our trust in him for it, he gives us this new heart. And look at the rewards. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They shall be comforted. They shall inherit the earth. They shall be satisfied. They shall receive mercy. They shall see God. They shall be called sons of God. And then the other bookmark, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. When we become kingdom citizens, it's because we have a new heart. And all of these needs, comfort and all of those things are satisfied in God so that we don't have to go after those things. And so our heart is already full. So anger, we can just let it go because we know what he's done for us. Steve and I, a long time ago, it was actually my sister's high school graduation. And it was back it was 1981 or 2, she graduated from high school. And we were there, and all the people were leaving. This graduation was out in the field. And this Marine, full uniform, young guy, full uniform, totally dressed, obviously a relative was graduating. And he was walking, and a group of boys approached him. And Steve and I are right close by, and they started making fun of him.
Wow.
I can't stand it. When somebody makes fun of somebody, I can hardly stand it. And so I was just like, trying to, and Steve, and I said to Steve, I feel so bad for him. I wish. And he said, Julie, don't worry a thing about him. He said, look at his face. He knows who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And as we walked by, Steve said, good evening. And the man said, good evening, sir. And he had kind of a half smile on his face. It rolled right off him.
Mm-hmm.
And why? Because he knew who he was, and he had that in him. We know we're kingdom citizens. We know he's transformed us. So we can have a heart that's pure, and we can be merciful, and we can do all of those things because of his work in us.
Mm.
And I feel like that's where Jesus is headed with this. And I'm very happy that I figured this out, because this be perfect is coming, but in verse 48. But I just thought he's already done it. He's done it for us. And what comes out of our heart shouldn't be anger and murder and any of that kind of stuff, adultery, lust, all that stuff. We don't need it. We don't need it because we've already been satisfied. We've already been filled. We've already been made complete. And I am going to talk about next week a little bit about that already not yet aspect of our salvation, but there's definitely not time. But anyway, I just thought it was a good thought to end with. He already did it. That's the good news.
Hallelujah.
All right, so let's pray and end our session together. Lord, I do thank you so much for the gracious mercy you have bestowed on us, for the absolutely unconditional love, through nothing that we've done, through no way that we've earned your merit or your respect. It's all about you and what you did, and the work that you have performed in us. Help us, Lord, to always depend on that fact, and not on the fact that we are frail and we are prone to sin because of our sinful nature. We are all those things, but we know, Lord, that you have already made us complete. And so we thank you for that. Help us, Lord, to think like kingdom citizens, and help us, Lord, as we continue in this series and study next week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 All right. Great discussion tonight, girls. You're keeping me on my toes. Holy moly.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Okay, you take care.
Hi, everybody.
Good night, ladies.
Don't forget to stop recording, Julie.
Stop. Oh, that's the sharing part.
Yeah.
Oh, brother. Where's Melanie? Oh, she's coming. She's yelling.
There we go.
Here she comes.
I almost killed myself on your door. So we stop sharing first.
Yeah.
We go to record
And stop.